Rural Heritage on RFD TV is brought to you by Rural Heritage Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine featuring articles about farming and logging with draft animal power, small-scale diversified family farming and homesteading, and other aspects of our rich rural heritage. Rural Heritage Magazine, borrowing from yesterday to do the work of today. For subscription information, please call 319-362-3027 or order online at www.ruralheritage.com. Hi, I'm Joe Mishka welcoming you to another half hour of Rural Heritage on RFD TV. Today we're going to spend some time with Bob Kroeger of Cincinnati, Ohio. A retired dentist, Bob has begun a mission to document the historic barns of Ohio before they've all rotted away. With oil, canvas, and palette knives, he makes paintings of the barns, and then he tells their stories. All of this is in a new book, Historic Barns of Ohio. What I particularly like about this book is Bob spares no expense in telling these stories. He talks about the people who built the barns, why they built them, who they sold them to, how were they altered over the years. Barns tell a story. They tell a story of the farmers who worked in them, the families who were there, the livestock that they fed and raised. Artifacts of these stories are evident throughout the barn. Bob Kroeger has made it his mission to tell these stories.
I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, northeast Ohio, and over the years I transferred here, transferred there, finally decided to become a dentist. I went to Ohio State University, and then I was in the Navy. I had 1 year at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and 3 years on the USS Simon Lake, which was a submarine tender located for the most part in Rota, Spain. And we took care of the Trident submarines. And then I came back to the U.S. and decided to establish a practice of dentistry in Cincinnati, where my wife and I raised 5 children. It was a busy time, and I loved what I did, and I'm very proud of the 5 children that have grown up. But unfortunately, my wife died when she was 56. And so then I had a big house with no wife and no kids, and I got a little lonely, so I got remarried. And my new wife, Laura, decided to have a traditional surprise anniversary trip. And so 1 year in 2012, it was her turn, and we drove out to Licking County, which is about an hour to the east of Columbus. And as we turned down the road to our bed and breakfast, there on the top of a little hill was an old gray barn. The roof was sagging, it was tilted about 10 degrees, there were boards missing. It was a wonderful gray patina, and it sent me a message. It was like a thunderbolt right between my eyes. You're going to paint this barn, you're going to write about it, and you're going to preserve Ohio history. Wow, I couldn't believe it. So we talked about it at dinner that night, tried to figure it out, because it was real. And the next morning, which was Saturday morning, we knocked on the farmhouse door, circa 1830. A little man came to the door, hadn't shaved in a while, no shoes on. What do you want? I said, well, I got this idea last night that I'm supposed to do a painting of your barn and write a story about it and preserve Ohio history. And all of a sudden he changed 180 degrees and he said, okay. So he told me about the Welsh people from the East Coast moving into the area, which they did. They founded Granville, and the Civil War grants to the soldiers and the gun shop across the street. And that's how it started.
It's almost time to put up a new calendar. Make yours a draft horse calendar featuring a couple dozen photos of draft horses at work, show, and play. We've been making these calendars for over 40 years and guarantee your satisfaction. They cost only $16.95 each, or 2 for $30. Shipping charges included. Just call 877-647-2452 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. That's 877-647-2452.
I wasn't concerned about the writing part because I had written several books, and that was not a problem. But I hadn't painted in a long time. Even though my dad was an artist, he had a degree from Notre Dame, and worked as a commercial artist in Youngstown, I had I'd never taken instruction from him, though I did some paintings early on. I realized that you can't just paint, you have to draw. So I went back to the basics, and that's proportion and perspective and values and color harmony. And so I studied and studied and studied, and I took workshops, and I met a wonderful artist in the area who gave me a lot of lessons. And finally I decided I would just jump in, and I did some paintings that were pretty ugly. I mean, they were really, really bad. But they were the start, and then I'm ready to see a barn. So I drive north into Warren County, and I found a couple of nice barns, and one of them had a great story to it, which is in the book. And one day I was looking at a wonderful barn, knocked on the farmhouse door, and nobody answered, so I began taking a few photos and doing a sketch, like I usually do. And I noticed down the hill there was a little pond, and somebody was down there doing something. And then I noticed that somebody got on a ATV, started right up the hill. And as he got a little closer, he had a long beard down to his waist. And I thought, boy, that's going to be interesting. And something across his waist. And as he got a little closer, that something across his waist was a rifle. I said, well, this could be really interesting. And he approached me and he said, what are you doing? You have no right to be here. This is private property, and you're taking pictures. And I was just down at the lake shooting cottonmouths, and I got 5 or 6 shots. And I said, okay, all right. So I explained what I was trying to do and what my Ohio Barn project was, and he was very nice to me. But then I realized that he was correct. This was private property, and theoretically I was trespassing. And yes, there are guard dogs, and there are rifles and shotguns. So I sent a few emails out, and I struck pay dirt with the Historical Society in Highland County. That's about an hour to the east of Cincinnati. And I met a wonderful person there named Sandy Shoemaker, who with her husband Tim had purchased a farm with a fellow named Howard Graybill, and they became my first barn scouts. And my first barn scout knew everybody in Highland County. She worked for the USDA, and she approved waterways. And she grew up in the area, and we saw many, many barns. So I had a number of paintings finished. What do I do with them? So I was thinking about the 4-H, and Sandy said, that's a good idea. They are interested in fundraisers. So I didn't know much about that since I had grown up in Youngstown, and I was never in the 4-H. And so I went to the county fair in September, and I sat in on the goat judging competition. And I know all the finer points of presenting a goat, by the way. And these kids that came out were clean cut. They had crew cuts. Girls were sharply dressed, and it was like going back in a time machine in the 1950s, like when I grew up. And it was wholesome, and I thought to myself, this is it. So my paintings went into their annual dinner in March, and raised about 1/3 of their total proceeds, and did it again the next year, and raised then some money for the Historical Society. And that's how it started. And I progressed throughout Ohio. I met a lot of barn scouts, a lot of wonderful people. I've done a number of events for historical societies and other nonprofits with my paintings. When I typically do a barn demonstration painting, takes a couple of hours, and then I use about an hour of time to tell barn stories, which I love, and then I sign books. And that raises a little money for historical societies, especially after last year when they couldn't do much of anything because of the virus. So that's what I do, and I'll probably do this for the rest of my life. The funny thing was, I realized I had to do this. I mean, that message is so strong, but for many years I didn't know why. I knew what I was doing, I really didn't know why. So I had a book by Edward Curtis, who was a photographer, took many wonderful photos of Native Americans from about 1890 to about 1920, and marvelous, marvelous pictures of these tribes throughout the Southwest and the Northwest. And in one of the books, I read a quote that he said that it's very important for me to be able to capture a culture that's vanishing so rapidly, which it was doing on the reservations. And I thought to myself, that's what I'm doing. I'm capturing the old barn and the role it played and the stories associated with it. And I'd like to share with you an example of what this means. And this is a painting that I did, which is framed in the wood from the barn. And this is in Hocking County, which is a very, very rural county, about 2 hours to the southeast of Columbus. And when we passed by this barn, 2018, this is how it looked. And it was engulfed by weeds, waist-high weeds, so we couldn't go there. We didn't know the owner. But I liked it. There was something about it that appealed to me. So I painted it, and it was in a fundraiser earlier in 2021. And it raised some money. And so when I did my tour in March, she told me, guess what? The barn collapsed. And it did. But there wasn't huge growth, so we could walk out to the barn and look at the timbers. We met the owner, and I was amazed because the timbers showed me probably that it was built before the Civil War. So it was very, very, very old. And the sad thing is the owner does not know the story, the founders, the farmers. That's gone. I got the barn, but I missed the stories. So that's why I do this.
If you enjoy seeing how our ancestors lived during America's rule yesterday, you're going to love looking at these books. Volume 1 is fieldwork showing horses and vintage tractors preparing seed beds, planting, cultivating, and harvesting the crop. Volume 2 shows the work being done in the barn and farmyard, feeding and watering the livestock, getting the crop into the barn, milking the cows, shearing the sheep, and collecting the eggs. In Volume 3, we go inside the home to see the family in the kitchen canning vegetables, in the parlor listening to the radio, and in the dining room for family supper. We also head into town to shop at the general store or visit on the town square on Saturday night. Each book has over 140 large format pages. They sell for $24.95 each, or you can buy 2 for $44.95, or all 3 for $54.95 plus shipping. Call 1-877-647-2452 to order. That's 1-877-647-2452.
This is not a commercial venture for me. My paintings don't sell for a whole lot of money, even though they're framed in wood from either barns or the barn painted. But they do preserve history, which is why I do it. And some people might think I'm a hobbyist. I do this as a hobby, and that's fine. I don't take that as an insult. I look at it as a second career, and everybody gets a different calling in life, and this is my calling right now. However, I will tell you that things have happened almost without me trying to make them happen, making me feel that I'm just kind of a puppet being moved around by the big guy upstairs. And one thing led to another, to another, to another. So 2019, I got a contact from the representative for Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, for the History Press, or Arcadia. And he asked me about doing a book. And I knew the History Press produced a nice little 6x9 paperback. But I was interested in a book 3 or 4 years from now, a bigger book, coffee table book with big colorful paintings and sort of an ego trip for an artist. But that was my vision for an art book. And then I thought to myself, what do you want? Do you want a big coffee table book cost $40, $50 and a limited market, or do you want a smaller paperback costing in the 20s? What do you want to do? do you want to spread the gospel of the old barn, or do you want the ego trip? So I asked for a book that had color in it, and he sent me one, beautiful color, and they print in the USA. Most art books are printed overseas. They keep the jobs right here in the USA. So the History Press is just wonderful. Editor was fantastic, guided me in the right direction. Great cover, great editing, so I'm very happy with them. And talking about book number 2 now. Over the years, the stories have become almost more important than the paintings. It was my hope that if somebody 50, 100 years from now would have one of these paintings and read the essay, he or she would relive what the pioneers went through and the value of the old barn, which was the moneymaker in those days. You had to have something to protect your livestock when it was cold, store the crops, and without the old barn, you wouldn't have Ohio as it is today. The stories evolved over time. The first story was what I call hunting mushrooms, and it traces back to my barn scout. So I met Sandy and her husband Tim with the co-owner Howard Graybill, whose family purchased the farm in the 1940s, and Howard was born in 1945. And we're talking on the deck of the old farmhouse circa 1910. And Sandy said, you know, Bob, Howard was born in this farmhouse. And Howard said, no, I wasn't. No, he said, when my mom was due for me, she looked around and Dad was gone. He was out deep in the woods somewhere hunting mushrooms. And so Grandpa was there. So he said, hop in the truck, which I did, which my mom did. And we never got to the hospital. So I was born in the truck. So that was the first story. I do enjoy meeting the people who own the barns, because an old barn, old meaning from my standpoint before 1930, is special. It becomes, especially if it's been passed down from one generation to the next, becomes a very special part of the family. And sometimes I don't realize how important it is, but I'll give you an example. I got a phone call last February from a wonderful barn scout up in Hancock County. And he said, Bob, guess what? Our barn burned down. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. There was a very cold stretch. They had to have some heating lamps in for the young calves that had been born. And there was a short circuit, and it was a total loss. And then what he said really clicked. But he said, Bob, at least we have your painting. Some of the stories are related to the name of the county and the origin of the name of the county, which is interesting. And some of the stories are related to the farmers, and some of the stories are related to the present day.
After we come back, Bob is going to take us to a nearby barn that he had painted and put in his book. He'll walk us through showing us some of the artifacts that he notices in the barn and how he approaches his paintings. The rural American countryside is still filled with historic old barns built a century or more ago, but they won't be standing forever. To commemorate and capture the images and stories of the old barns, Ohio native Bob Kroeger began painting and writing their histories, and that's all come together in a new book called Historic Barns of Ohio. You can get your copy by calling 877-647-2452 or visiting ruralheritage.com. It costs just $23.99 plus $7 shipping. Call 877-647-2452.
It was on the banks of the Little Miami River, which is in Clermont County.
Okay.
And then, fortunately, a conservancy group purchased it and brought it over here. So it's our treasure now. And it's the barn in my book. And you can see all the axe marks from when they chopped the tree down, squared it up, left the hump in the middle, connected one to the other. And the same thing on the other side. And in this one they've got several mortises cut where tenons would fit in there.
Sure. And what makes it a swing? Did you call it a swing beam?
A swing beam, yeah. It would swing from one side to the other. Usually there's a little hump in the middle.
Okay.
As there is. You don't see too many of these. Most of the time it's a square beam without that hump in the middle. So
right.
It's a beauty. So typically when I visit a barn, is I'll look at it from a couple different sides and I'll try to figure out what's the best angle I want. And typically I like to involve two sides, and that helps to get a little bit of what's called perspective, which is like a two-dimensional, three-dimensional look, to make it look like it's a real thing. So in the composition I did that's in the book, I like this angle. It was sunset. The sunset was over the trees. There were shadows from the trees all around here, and it was a wonderful, wonderful view. And then I'll take a few photos with my camera, and then I'll do what's called a value sketch. And a value sketch doesn't take much time. Simply I simply do a quick rendition, and you can see there's a little bit of a bank there, not much, but a little bit, and then there's a little overhang there. So then the sun is over there, so the sun comes in from that angle. So this might be a little bit lighter, and it might be dark. And so I record the shadows, and I like to put a little path in, because there was a path there. That's on a small bank, and so that's where the wagon would drive up with the goods and so forth. And that just gives me a little bit of a feel for what I want to do. And if there's some colors I like, I'll make notation of the colors. There's some green in the roof. There's some honey brown streaks here and there on the siding. And I make notations as far as that goes.
And of course the photograph would help remind you as well.
Yes, but sometimes things look a little differently in person versus on the photograph.
Sure.
The problem with photographs is they tend to make dark things look darker and light things look a little too light. So it can be a little deceptive, but that's how I do it, and it tends to work out pretty well. I like to paint representationally, which means I'm hoping that the barn owner at least can identify the barn. If that's the case, I know I've succeeded. If not, I haven't.
Thanks for joining us today for another episode of Rural Heritage on RFD TV, where we borrow from yesterday to do the work of today. This program is available for purchase. To order your copy, please call 319-362-3027 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. Rural Heritage is a bi-monthly magazine dedicated to draft animal farming and logging, as well as other aspects of our rich rural heritage. It is published by Mishka Press, which also offers a complete line of back-to-the-land books, DVDs, and calendars. Call or write for a catalog or subscription information, or visit our website at www.ruralheritage.com.